Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing the most important news story in the history of humankind, with barely a register on the panic meter of the mainstream news. Not nearly enough on the panic meter by governments, world governments, our government. There's ample evidence continuing to roll in every single day. I am here to provide you with that evidence, as depressing and dreary as it might be. I understand that this can be overwhelming for people. This can be something that people don't want to think about or take a look at or contemplate or have to deal with or have to take action on. It's a lot to bear mentally and emotionally. And I get it and I understand it. And sometimes I feel like, taking a break or just not even really worrying about it. Occasionally viewers of the channel have to bow out for a little while and take care of some mental health and, do some self-care, and that's totally understandable. And I urge people as much as possible to find the joy in their day and find the joy in their life, that they, live your life as fully and as joyfully as you possibly can, whether climate change is taking us out or not. We all must leave this mortal coil one day. None of us live forever. All of us have an expiration date, and we don't know what that date is. So if there are things you want to experience in life, or if there's greater understanding that you wish to gain in life, today is the day to start seeking it and feeling it and knowing it. I also wanted to bring up the term speciesism, which I don't hear people talk much about. I'm going to try. I'm just going to lightly touch on it. Obviously, speciesism is the idea that we are more important than other species. It's kind of like the ultimate racism, only we are doing it worldwide. And every human, not every single human on the earth, but I'd say, the vast majority of people on earth live life in a way that is oppressive to all other species on this planet, plants and animals, and the biosphere in general. We are doing a grave disservice to our host, to our Mother Earth, to the thing that sustains us. We are absolutely disrespecting her every single day in every single way, and we are all of us responsible. And this is one of the greatest I don't know if you want to call it a crime. I guess maybe you could. Injustices is the word I was looking for. While we are very good at dealing injustice to each other and to other people and to people that are not like us, and as much as humans love to get down and dirty in that muck, we can't even look outside of ourselves long enough to understand how badly we are destroying how badly we are destroying other animals and other life forms, and how we take it for granted that we can destroy them, that we must destroy them, that it is our job, that it is just something that we do. It's a knee-jerk reaction. It is one of those faulty programs that human beings receive from the time they are born, that we are superior, that we must master and control, that we must eliminate if it threatens us in any way. This is fundamentally wrong, and this is fundamentally what will lead to our demise. I guess that's all I have to say about that. I'm going to speak some more upon that in the future. You just never hear the word speciesism. There's a whole lot of isms in the world, but that's one that I never hear. And considering what we are doing to the planet, it again, this is something that should be in mainstream lexicon. This should be something that people are always talking about, speciesism, but we never do. Possibly because it's all too true, and it's something that we refuse to look at or deal with or face or conquer. Moving on to lovely climate change news. This is from The Guardian. This is from Jeff Sparrow, March 11th, 2018. Climate change is a disaster foretold, just like the First World War. The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime. The mournful remark supposedly made by Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey at dusk on the 3rd of August, 1914, referred to Britain's imminent entry into the First World War, but the sentiment captures something of our own moment, in the midst of an intensifying campaign against nature. According to the World Wildlife Fund's 2016 Living Planet report, over the last 4 decades, the international animal population was reduced by nearly 60%. More than 1 billion fewer birds inhabit North America today compared to 40 years ago. In Britain, certain iconic species, gray partridges, tree sparrows, etc., have fallen by 90%. In Germany, flying insects, excuse me, have declined by 76% over the past 27 years. Almost half of Borneo's orangutans died or were removed between 1999 and 2015. Elephant numbers have dropped by 62% in a decade, with on average 1 adult killed by poachers every 15 minutes. We inherited a planet of beauty and wonders, and we're saying goodbye to all of that. The cultural historian Paul Fussell once identified the catastrophe of the First World War with a distinctive sensibility of modernity, noting how 20th century history had domesticated the fantastic and normalized the unspeakable. Consider then the work of climate change. In February, for instance, scientists recorded temperatures 35 degrees above historical average in Siberia, a phenomenon that apparently corresponded with the unprecedented cold snap across Europe. As concentrated CO2 intensifies extreme events, a new and diabolical weather will, we're told, become the norm for a generation already customizing itself to such everyday atrocities as about 8 million tons of plastics are washed into the ocean each year. The passage from the New Yorker's Elizabeth Kolbert, I'm going to read this. It may seem impossible to imagine that a technologically advanced society could choose, in essence, to destroy itself, but that is what we are now in the process of doing. This passage from the New Yorker's Elizabeth Kolbert concluded on a piece on global warming, which was published way back in 2005. Over the 13 years since, the warnings from scientists have grown both more specific and desperate. And yet the march to destruction has only redoubled its pace. The extraordinary, almost absurd contrast between what we should be doing and what's actually taking place fosters low-level climate denialism. Excuse me. Coral experts might publicize again and again and again the dire state of the Great Barrier Reef, but the ongoing political inaction inevitably blunts their message. It can't be so bad, we think. If a natural wonder were truly under threat, our politicians wouldn't simply stand aside and watch. The First World War killed 20 million people and maimed 21 million others. It shattered the economy of Europe, displaced entire populations, and set in train events that culminated scarcely 2 decades later with one another, even more apocalyptic slaughter. And it too was a disaster foretold, a widely anticipated cataclysm that proceeded more on less schedule, despite regular warnings about what was to come. As early as 1898, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia initiated a conference to discuss international arbitration and limit the arms race taking place in Europe. At its opening session at The Hague, he noted the competition between nations, in which each country was building up its forces to defend against its neighbors, had transformed the armed peace into a crushing burden that weighs on all nations, and if prolonged, will lead to the very cataclysm that it seeks to avert. Over the next years, the rivalries intensified, leading to further militarization and a complex series of often secret treaties. Excuse me. As between 1908 and 1913, the military spending of the major powers increased by 50%. In 1912, the International Socialist Movement had staged an emergency meeting in Basel in Switzerland, in which representatives from almost every nation spoke out for peace. The great European peoples are constantly on the point of being driven against one another, the Congress resolved. Although these attempts are against humanity and reason cannot be justified by even the slightest pretext of being in the interest of the people. Yet in early 1914, Winston Churchill noted that the world is arming as it has never armed before. The eventual declaration of war in August that year was still a shock, but only in the sense that those attending a patient expiring from a long illness might be startled by the death rattle. The appeals to humanity and the reason did not move states jostling for trade and commercial advantages. For the people of Europe, the arms race was disastrous. For specific governments, it made perfect sense. For those who did not compete, risked falling behind. The same might be said today. From a global perspective, the necessity to abandon fossil fuels cannot be denied. But for individual economies, change risks undermining comparative advantages. If we don't sell coal, says Malcolm Turnbull, our competitors will, which was, of course, precisely the logic of the British fleet expansion of 1908. The devastation of the First World War eventually engendered a wave of revolt from a populace appalled at the carnage their politicians had wrought. Climate change has not yet spurred an equivalent of the mutinies in France or the revolution in Petrograd or the uprising in Berlin. Yet Labor's appalling equivocation of the Adini mine, a piece of environmental vandalism for which there can be no justification, illustrates the urgency with which we need a new and different type of politics. The stakes could not be higher. Lamps are going out all over the world, and no one will ever see them lit again. Yes, indeed, a new type of politics, a politics that puts environment first, not economies. As ridiculous and crazy as that sounds, we have to find a way to communicate to people that the jobs and the way that they live are no longer viable, and that they must make a change, and that change must be agricultural. That change must be extremely simplified. Whether they choose to make these changes or not, these changes will be made for them anyways. So, you can suffer the pain of, downsizing in a hurry, of being, basically thrown into the wilderness to fend for yourself. Probably most people with no training and no experience at all in fending for themselves in the wilderness. Or you can choose to train yourself and relearn those skills long lost to humans today. And I actually wanted to, I think it was Barb sent me a video on something that was touched in the article from last night. Let's see if we got it here. I'm going to link it in the description box below. But it was basically Unlearn and Rewild. It's an Unlearn Rewild video, and it's an interview with a man who is living kind of on the edges of civilization and living a very simplified life. Let's see if we can get it up here so I can give you the correct title. Maybe not. This isn't it. Anyways. Oh, actually, I think she sent it to right onto my Facebook page. It is here. Unlearn, Rewild, Part 1. There's actually 2 parts of this. I have not watched Part 2. But this is a good video. I highly suggest it. There's a Part 2 also, which will come up, you know, as you're watching this one on YouTube. It'll suggest this video and just kind of talks about re-entering, living in the wild, living off the land, living outside of civilization. This is a good little primer on that. Moving on to a article from Dahr Jamail from Truth Out, March 12th. Washington state's deep political and economic alliance with the Pentagon. And this is quite an article about how even Democrats are selling us out for profit and selling us out to the military. When one thinks of Washington state in the Pacific Northwest, visions of lush, temperate Olympic rainforests or glacial glad mountains of North Cascades National Park might come to mind. I think he meant glacial clad, but maybe not. Instead, what if you learned Washington state was allocating millions of dollars of its taxpayers' money to fund institutions set up to do nothing more than lobby for a larger military presence? Additionally, what if you found out that one of your elected representatives, who you were led to believe was a liberal Democrat, had positioned herself atop said institution and had actively sponsored a bill aimed at allowing the military free rein to do what it wants, whatever it wants, wherever it wants to do within the state, with little or no recourse for the citizens it could impact? In supposedly blue Washington state, this is exactly what is happening. The taxpayer-funded institution set up to lobby for military expansion is the Washington Military Alliance. The politician is Washington Representative Christine Reeves, a Democrat who also happens to be the executive director of the WMA. The bill she sponsored, HB 2341, would have essentially handed United States military commanders control of the state's land use powers. Christine Reeves is double dipping, although it might be legal, by being the executive director for the Washington Military Alliance while proposing laws that advance the objectives of the WMA as a Washington state legislator. Glenn Milner, a researcher with the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action, told Truth Out. In addition, the Washington Military Alliance gets its grants from the DoD, added Milner, who has been tracking the expanding militarism across Washington state for decades. I suppose this is just corruption at work. While Reeves might be progressive on many issues, she's clearly doing what the military's doing the military's bidding, according to Milner. Excuse me. And while HB 2341 failed for now to make it out of committee, thanks to committed grassroots efforts by citizens concerned about their state becoming a wider scale military training area, Reeves's efforts to run far deeper than just the bill. Reeves's efforts run far deeper than just that bill. Washington state residents should be concerned because the WMA sees at least some parts of the state as a power projection platform for the military. Milner warned Truth Out. In fact, power projection platform are not Milner's words, they are Representative Reeves' words. The lawmaker used the exact same phrase in an email to members of Washington State's Department of Commerce in the January 2016 email obtained by Truth Out. Representative Reeves discussed her efforts to help generate a graphic for the Deputy Chief of Staff at Joint Base Lewis McChord, in Washington, a massive military installation south of Tacoma, to show the value of the strategic placement of JBLM and its dependence on the outside the fence infrastructure that creates the designation of power projection platform. Wah, 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 wah. Her rough graphic shows 4 arrows emanating from Washington state and pointing across the Pacific toward North Korea and other locations. A power projection platform, a term used by both the military and the WMA, is a hub for the combined elements of national power, political, economic, informational, and military, that facilitates a country's ability to rapidly and effectively deploy and sustain forces around the world. Reeves is far from alone in her efforts. Jay Inslee, Washington's so-called green governor, along with his Department of Commerce, appears to have been for years acting as a strong proponent for military activity in Washington state. By actively supporting the WMA and other similar efforts, as well as signing off on documents like the retaining and expanding military missions, increasing defense spending and investment, Inslee has sought to increase military personnel and training across Washington. This is all about who controls Washington state, Milner warned. Does our state government follow the wishes of state citizens or the Department of Defense? A Truth-Out investigation points toward powerful forces in the state government actively collaborating with the Department of Defense. Founded in 2012 under then Washington Governor Christine Gregoire, the WMA was made operational under Governor Inslee in 2014 with a $4.3 million grant from the DoD's Office of Economic Adjustment. It's a great name. The OEA has provided other grants for Washington state and counties, such as funding for joint land use studies, which are supposedly planning efforts between active military installations and their surrounding jurisdictions, state and federal agencies, and other affected stakeholders aimed at addressing compatibility around military installations and military operations. In 2016, the OEA provided a $585,000 grant to the Department of Commerce, which includes the WMA, to create a legislative report for military issues and for 2017 program funding. As you might expect, all of this creates nothing more than propaganda for the Department of Defense, Milner explained. Whenever the WMA addresses anything, the first thing mentioned is jobs, 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 without any analysis of how the civilian sector could use huge areas of real estate in Washington state that are now military bases. The various joint land use studies in the legislative report are all propaganda with no input that might stand against military objectives. Documents show that via the Washington Military Alliance, Washington's Department of Commerce hired the Spectrum Group as their go-to Beltway consulting group to assist in making all of Washington state more compatible, quote unquote, with military activities. Several emails have revealed Representative Reeves' ongoing efforts to work closely with military personnel by sharing meals and meetings with them over recent years as they collaborated on many issues geared towards giving the military more control over land use decisions across Washington. Unfortunately, the taxpayer-funded WMA Department of Commerce reports appear to have been accepted as fact by Reeves and some other members of the legislature, as evidenced by the egregious nature of the failed HB 2341. All of this has serious practical implications for residents of Washington state. The emails between the WMA, the Department of Commerce, and the governor's office from 2016 reveal that the Department of Defense has expressed interest in utilizing large areas of the state for its purposes. These are called regions of military influence, and according to the emails, the Department of Defense's planning models extend beyond a physical base to include military airspace, testing and training ranges, corridors, along with electronic warfare areas, among others. Throughout his term, Governor Inslee has shown himself to be a great friend of the Navy. In 2015, when Governor Inslee received the highest civilian honor from the Navy, one of the reasons for honoring Inslee listed on the award was his role in helping to keep Boeing in Seattle in 2014, as well as his effort to maintain a strategic industrial base in Washington. Inslee worked to provide huge tax breaks and other incentives for Boeing. The public was told that the $8.7 billion in tax breaks and union contract concessions promoted by Governor Inslee were to keep the Boeing 777X production in the region. However, after Boeing got its tax break, it ended up cutting jobs in Washington state. Take that. Hence the purpose of keeping Boeing jobs in the state via tax breaks and union contract. I think I'm supposed to do that. Take that. in the state via tax breaks and union contract concessions was not attained. Furthermore, the award ceremony in which Governor Inslee received his award from the Navy was coordinated in part by Representative Reeves, who helped to provide Inslee his talking points for his 2015 meeting with then Secretary of the Navy Ray Mabus. Very, very cozy. Very, very cozy. I cannot read this entire article. It is very, very long. Because I'm going to be here for another 10 or 15 minutes. Let me see. I was surprised to see so many Democrat sponsors on these bills, which fueled my efforts to communicate the ruinous impacts and to call upon legislators to halt these bills. Homola, who is a former island country commissioner, who was married to a former naval aviator of 25 years. Without naming Representative Reeves specifically, she pointed to potential conflicts of interest. The House prime sponsor's role as an elected state representative in tandem with her state agency paid position may not be against the law in Washington, but it does call to question obvious conflicts when the official's legislation will directly benefit the department she directs, Homola said. Homola pointed out that a 2014 study laid out a plan to identify how Washington state will backfill lost DoD spending while promoting a long-term strategic plan in support of the military and defense sector. Valid independent cost and benefit studies must be conducted that accurately reflect the cost of military occupation and expansion in Washington state before we invite and pay for further expansion. The majority of the bill sponsors were Democrats. Alongside dozens of military personnel at various ranks, lawmakers such as Senator Patty Murray, along with Representative Reeves and then newly elected Representative Dahr Kilmer, were thanked by name. They're thanked in a defense contractor report. The WMA's Memorandum of Agreement states that its purpose is convened by the governor and includes representation from Washington state legislators, state agencies, local elected officials, regional community groups supporting local military installations, and organizations promoting military and defense economic development in Washington state. It adds that the WMA itself will provide a framework for collaboration in the state between local governments, military installations, state agencies, and federal agencies to better coordinate a unified message as military and defense decisions are being considered, and it will recommend actions to be taken at local, state, and federal levels to enhance military infrastructure, industry, and partnership retention and expansion in Washington state. Given that the U.S. is, at least in theory, a democracy, advocates say that what is missing in this equation is civilian opinion, especially since ultimately it is civilian lives that will be most affected. At the time of this writing, Truthout's request for comment from Representative Reeves has not received a response. Yep. What's the word I'm looking for? Collusion. Collusion by Democrats that are supposed to be progressives, protecting the environment and protecting people's lives, and just selling us right on down the river because we need more dollars. Or do we? Someday, somewhere, somehow, or maybe not, some sane politicians might start arriving, speaking truth, and speaking about actual policies that mean something to our future, something to the future of humanity, something to the future of all other species on the earth, something to the future of our oceans, something to the future of the fish in the ocean, something to the I don't know, something to help save off the inevitable crash course we are on with the end. with eternity. That is all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so with the links below. Thank you. And until next time, peace.